The iconic Michael Myers in 1978's Halloween photo compass International Pictures Joel DrabaMann, 13 hours Wednesday, October 25, 2017. In the autumn of 1978, a low-budget, American horror film debuted at the cinema to little fanfare. But word gradually began to spread about John Carpenter's Halloween. Bit by bit, curious viewers began to line up to see it on the big screen. Esteemed critic Roger Ebert famously lauded it, one of the few horrors he praised. "A merciless thriller," wrote Ebert. "If you don't want to have a really terrifying experience, don't see Halloween." This terrifying experience went on to become one of the most successful independent films of all time, grossing more than $70 million worldwide, around $272 million in today's money. Carpenter's classic is often credited with creating the modern slasher movie, establishing the rules of the genre thereafter. It was made very cheaply, with little in the way of special effects, and therefore very cheap to rip off. Dr. Johnny Walker the Masked Murderer. Halloween's premise is simple. A cold, merciless killer returns to his hometown to embark on a bloody rampage, hacking his way through a group of unsuspecting teenagers. The unnervingly silent Michael Myers, clad in a spray-painted William Shatner mask, remains one of horror's most iconic creations. An archetype since seen in slasher series from Friday the 13th to Scream. After dispatching various high schoolers, Myers meets his match when faced with Laurie Strode. Jamie Lee Curtis. The final girl. Strode's prototypical final girl would become the most enduring trope of the slasher genre, a guaranteed survivor. More than 300 slashers were released in the decade following Halloween's release. Halloween showcased a strong and powerful female lead, notes horror expert and lecturer Dr. Johnny Walker, which has since become a staple not only of the slasher film, but the horror genre writ large. The final girl trope was soon seen in Halloween's various imitators, including the hugely successful Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street. Something of a bookworm, Strode managed to outwit the killer. Meanwhile, her more gregarious friends, dabbling in sex, drugs and rock and roll, would meet their end at the hands of the villain. It was very popular with young audiences, says Walker. The idea of strong and resourceful heroines, and relatable scenes of young people having a good time and being under threat, were particularly appealing to the movie's target demographic. Jamie Lee Curtis. Laurie Strode would provide the template for horror's final girl. Photo compass International Pictures. Michael Myers' suburban serial killings would inspire a glut of pretenders thereafter. More than 300 slashers were released in the decade following Halloween's release, modernizing the slasher. That said, the premise of a knife-wielding maniac on screen can be traced back to the early 1960s, with the release of Peeping Tom and Hitchcock's Psycho. Halloween's first-person opening scene may even be a direct reference to the former. Halloween is often credited as the first true slasher film, but this accolade comes at the expense of ignoring some key forerunners, notes Walker. The idea of a serial killer pursuing teens and sequences shown from the POV of the killer appeared first 1976's Black Christmas, he adds. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, released in 1974, also saw a group of youngsters menaced by a deranged killer. Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre photo vortex. Walker believes that Halloween's major contribution was to modernize the concept. It transported the idea from an unspecified American wilderness or a secluded motel, and plonked it down right in the heart of American suburbia. The original Scream movie references Halloween. Directly film nerd Randy pauses a screening of the film to explain the rules of the slasher genre. Terror could reach you at your home. Quiet American suburbia, a world of manicured lawns and middle-class income, was suddenly in jeopardy. It also helped mainstream the stock and slash formula. It was made very cheaply, with little in the way of special effects, and therefore very cheap to rip off. Highly influential Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and arguably the best slasher of the 80s, The Burning would follow Halloween's simple premise. None, however, would quite achieve the same commercial or critical success of their predecessor. Norman Bates. Anthony Perkins in Psycho, the original slasher villain. Photo Shamley Productions. Slasher films would come to dominate the 1980s, in much the same way as found footage movies dominated the 2000s. Like 1999's Blair Witch Project, Halloween was a low-budget independent film that went on to have a profound influence on the genre. The appeal of Halloween is still apparent today. Having already spawned 7 sequels, the series will reportedly, just like Myers, return once more. Jamie Lee Curtis is set to return to the franchise next year for a remake of Halloween 2. Halloween was among a mere handful of slasher films that was critically well received, notes Walker. From the spine-tingling piano of Carpenter's score, to the soulless black hole eyes of Myers, Halloween remains the slasher by which all imitators must be measured. More from The Exorcist's Deadly Curse, explored 45 years on horror on Netflix. 25 things to watch this Halloween. Hellraiser, what it was like to play Pinhead in the horror classic The Real-Life Killer Who Inspired Psycho, and use http://sinews.co.uk.